Good evening, ladies. Can I invite you all to start off with Omkara? Om. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. I welcome Carolyn, and Davina to start off.
Thank you. I'll start and welcome everybody.
Can't see Caroline.
It's nice to see so many of you back again this week. I've popped into the chat box a little message to say I hope you've all had a good week, and I hope you'll use the chat box just like you did last week to communicate with us. So please put in any experiences or any questions while I'm talking. Davina and Achal, keep an eye on that so that we can make sure we address all your issues as much as possible when I've finished my little bit of talk this evening. It's been nice to see quite a few of you active on the WhatsApp group and trying various different approaches to your cooking, tweaking recipes and things. And that's great because that's really what this is all about, is supporting each other, trying on this new lifestyle. So I'm going to share my screen now to show this week's slides and explain as I go along what we're up to this week. But as I say, please keep using the chat box so that we can keep some good dialogue going and answer your queries, etc. So if I just share screen now, are you able to enable that, Panna?
Yeah.
It says it's disabled at the moment. Right, let's see. Oh, I think we've got. Yeah, I'm seeing your screen now, Panna, not mine. Try again. No, it still says it's disabled.
Try again.
Ah, that's better. Here we go. Okay, so let's go on to slideshow. Okay, so welcome to week 2. If there are any of you here that weren't able to come last week and anything doesn't make sense, please obviously use the chat box to ask us any questions. Just a reminder that I'm not here as a health professional to give medical advice. We're here to impart information. Dacha and Davina and I are all ambassadors for the Public Health Collaboration and working as volunteers to help disseminate good information about lifestyle and diet, but not, as I say, medical professionals. If you are a diabetic, pre-diabetic, or have blood pressure that you're taking medication for, then it is a good idea to let your doctor know that you are changing your diet and going low carb so that you can keep an eye on you and monitor your medications. So just a reminder that if you haven't already done that, it is important. If you happen to be with a practice that's not too sure about low carb, please let us know via the WhatsApp group, and we can send you a template letter that's come from a GP that we work with to help explain to doctors who aren't as knowledgeable about this what you're doing and how they should manage your medication. So just a quick overview again of the 6 weeks that we've planned for the course, and this is week 2, and we're going to look at the macronutrients that make up a healthy diet, and in particular focus on fat this week, and a quick reminder of why it's bad to eat too many carbs. And this cartoon I found doing my bit of research this week, which I thought sums up what an awful lot of us are getting when we go to the GP now. There are many who are getting the message and who are working extremely well with low carb, but still sadly quite a lot will have this approach where, oh yeah, I've heard about low carb, but actually here we just, you know, tell you to eat the standard diet, and we give you pills, and if they don't work we give you insulin, and basically you've got diabetes for life. And that's really sad, because it doesn't need to be that way at all. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, can be managed well with lifestyle, and many people manage to get off medications. Not everybody, but even those that don't get completely off them are usually able to reduce them dramatically. So that's what this course is all about. It's helping you to find out how you might be able to do that. The other thing I would like to say is, because I know not all of you that are logged in are necessarily diabetic, many of you just want to lose weight. And this is a good way of losing weight, not only because it helps, really does work, but also the diet that we are encouraging you to eat is good for your overall health and your family's health. So please, in the household, whilst you might have some challenges, try and help your family members to know that this isn't just a diet to lose weight. This is a way of eating that will enhance your health and everybody's health. And we really do need to do that, as some of the figures I'll show you bear out. So the elements that make up a healthy diet should consist of the right balance of macronutrients and micronutrients. What we mean by micronutrients are those trace sort of things that occur in food: vitamins, minerals, trace elements. They're small quantities that make up naturally occurring foods, but they are vital to the good functioning of our bodies. And we will talk more about vitamins and minerals later on, because that's an important balance to get right as well. But today we're going to focus on the macronutrients, which are fat, protein and carbohydrate. Today we're featuring fat. Next week we'll look more at protein, and I discussed carbohydrates quite a bit last week, and we'll keep coming back to this, but we're going to focus on fat today. So this is just an illustration of the 3 groups of macronutrients, and often you'll hear them be referred to as macros for short. You will see in the middle is the protein section, and an awful lot of the protein in the human diet traditionally comes from meat and seafood. I appreciate an awful lot of you are vegetarian, and therefore you will need to use the dairy and eggs. And if you're vegan, you've got to work really hard at some of the nuts and pulses and other sources of protein. There are smaller amounts in those foods, so you have to make sure you're getting enough. Over on the left-hand side, as you look at the picture, are the carbs, most of which we're now suggesting are not a great idea to be eating. And then on the right are what we're going to focus on today, the fats. And we'll come back to where we get those from shortly. Because we have got, I know, some vegans as well as a lot of vegetarians in the group, just a different way of looking at the macros. So again, as I say, vegans really have to work hard at getting their protein from things like the pulses and the nuts, and foods like tofu, which derived from soy, and some of the nuts and seed protein powders that you can get now that are manufactured. We prefer wherever possible to get your food as naturally as possible, but you do have to really look closely at your protein intake and make sure you're getting sufficient. And obviously you're looking at all the plant-based sources of fats. The carbs are the same whatever way we eat, and they're the things that we should be monitoring very closely and trying to reduce dramatically in this particular approach to diet. So I mentioned that there are 3 macros, but actually of the 3, only 2 are essential for healthy life, and those are protein and fat. You will see and you will hear a lot of noise around in modern life that we need carbohydrates for energy. We absolutely do not need carbohydrates. They are non-essential to the human lifestyle. Many of the carbs that are highly refined and high in sugar are absolutely empty calories. So they will not be helping your weight at all, because they will be piling in energy that you're not using up. And just being converted into fat, and they are offering absolutely no nutritional value to your body whatsoever. Last week, if you remember, I mentioned thinking about food as fuel for our bodies. Just like you put petrol in a car, or other machinery requires oil and various other things to help it to function properly. And we treat our machines far, far better than we treat our bodies on the whole. We wouldn't dream of putting the wrong fuel in a car, but people are constantly putting the wrong fuel in their bodies. The human being is designed to function perfectly well without carbohydrate. And in fact, most of the carbohydrates that are around today are man-made. And that were never intended, our bodies were never intended to consume those products. So we can get all the energy we need from the fats that we eat. And if we're short of fat, we have a process that our bodies can go through called gluconeogenesis, where we actually make energy from protein. But most of us are here because we want to lose weight, which means around our bodies we have got a fantastic source of energy, all that fat that we want to get rid of. And the more you eat carbs, the more you stop yourself burning that fat to get rid of it. So the quickest and easiest way to lose that body fat is to knead it for your fuel. And you can create all the energy you need by using up that fat. But you will only start to do that when you dramatically reduce the carbohydrates that you consume. So why are we so obsessed about fat being bad for us? Because the messages that have been around now for the last few decades have been very much that fat is bad and carbs are good. It all stems back to the 1950s and 60s, when in America they started to see a higher incidence of heart disease. But if you ask the ordinary, and it was usually a woman in the street, how they'd go about losing weight back in the 50s and 60s, they would say, oh, I'd give up bread and potatoes. Because they instinctively knew that those were the foods that encouraged weight gain. There weren't many people trying to lose a lot of weight back then, because our diet was much more the way it was meant to be. We didn't have the mass-produced snacks and treats that we all are used to today. We didn't have the fast food outlets. People tended to cook at home and eat plain and simple cuisine, whatever your culture sort of dictated, but you just had your 3 meals a day. Most of us were much more physically active. I know I said the two things are separate, but in general, our lifestyle was much healthier. We were acting the way human beings were meant to behave. We were physically active and we ate the right kind of foods. I was born in the 1950s, and I do not remember seeing really, really overweight people. If you saw somebody who was exceptionally overweight, they were an anomaly and they stood out like a sore thumb, and we usually thought there was something wrong with them. They had some sort of medical condition. They were so unusual. And if you look at pictures of crowds in the 1950s and 60s, and even the early 1970s, you will not see fat people in those photographs. People were a pretty normal weight. But as I say, we understood that the things to sort of cut back on if you wanted to lose weight were the carbohydrates. So what happened? Well, this American problem, I think it started with the president having a heart attack, as well as the medical professions observing that they seem to be seeing a lot more heart disease than perhaps our predecessors had. And what was causing this? So they started to investigate it, and a particular chap called Ansel Keys was a researcher that seemed to sort of corner the market in this, and everybody listened to him. And he presented findings from studies that he did. He called it a 7-country study. And he decided that fat was the culprit. It turns out that he decided fat was the culprit before he did his study, and he just made sure that his findings pointed in that direction. many, many years later, we discovered that his research mechanisms and the way he reported his findings were deeply flawed. But unfortunately, he had the ear of senior people in America, and it soon filtered around the rest of the Western world that fat seemed to be the baddie. What was actually happening, and what we found out by 1964, was that smoking, which was socially totally acceptable back in the, in the interwar years and the 1940s and 50s, it was absolutely socially acceptable. If you watch any old films, you'll see people smoking everywhere. Even by the time I started nursing in 1974, we still allowed patients to smoke in the wards, and we could smoke on aeroplanes. I mean, it's hard to remember now, but smoking was socially acceptable. And in 1964, the link was made between cardiovascular disease and smoking, but the tobacco industry was so big and so powerful, they managed to keep that quiet. And Ansel Keys, with his fat theory, was allowed to gain momentum. The sugar industry was also a very, very powerful industry and had lots of money to throw at politicians and throw at the food industry, and again, pushed aside any notion that there was anything else causing a heart disease other than fat. So unfortunately, we ended up with guidelines being set for all these different countries, starting in America and filtering over to Europe and many other countries, that fat was bad and we should be eating far more carbohydrates, and that was going to solve all our problems. So the American Heart Association came up with these guidelines saying 50% of our energy should come from carbohydrates, and what fats we ate should be vegetable oils, margarine and sunflower oil, and all of these highly processed and what we now know are toxic oils were being lauded as far, far better for us than naturally occurring fats such as olive oils and butter and all the animal sourced natural fats that we've been eating for generations before. It beggars belief now that people fell for this, but unfortunately they did. And for decades now, this is what we've been eating. And have we got better? Of course we haven't. This graph shows you the bottom big bar going across from left to right is, a huge period of time where our consumption of carbohydrates has been absolutely static. If you can see just over on the extreme right hand side, there's a tiny bit of a blip up for the beginning of the 20th century when our consumption of carbohydrates started to increase. And then the little inset graph shows you what's happened since the 1960s. And our carbohydrate intake has soared from where it was in 1960 up to the 2000s and beyond, and it's getting worse and worse. And the human body simply wasn't designed to consume this level of carbohydrate. And what happened at the same time? This graph could be replicated in any European country, and particularly in the UK. So we've got the number of people who were what happened there? The number of people who were considered overweight back in the early 1970s. These guidelines came in, and obesity soared, and along with it, diabetes and all the other chronic diseases. And cardiovascular disease has remained one of the major causes of death and ill health. We have dropped the amount of animal fat that we've eaten, but we've been eating these processed vegetable oils instead. But the carbohydrates are clearly not doing anything for our health. So, does eating fat make you fat and sick? Over the past 50 years, we've been rather conned into thinking it does, but actually the sugar industry has been very, very responsible for shifting the blame from sugar and everything that is digested down to sugar, and blaming fat instead. But we're actually blaming fat for what the sugar did. And that's the point we all get to get hold of. Sugar is highly addictive. There was a book written in the 1970s suggesting that it was called Pure, White and Deadly, which you might think refers to something like cocaine. But this book actually suggested that sugar was more addictive than cocaine and equally as harmful for the human body. But the author of that book got pushed aside by Ansel Keys and all his followers, who were blaming fat for all the damage. And we're only now coming to realise where the truth lies. So a little bit of science about fat. Fat is a molecule which consists of 3 fatty acids linked together with a sort of glycerol link backbone, if you like. And those 3 fatty acids together make up triglycerides. Sorry. The digestion process breaks down the fat into the individual fatty acids, and there are actually loads and loads of different fatty acids, and they have different purposes. Sorry, there aren't loads and loads of fatty acids. There are loads and loads of molecules that make up the different fatty acids. But the 3 principal groups of fatty acids that we look at get broken down in digestion, and we use them for energy. We can store them, and we are meant to store a little bit of fat for those feast and famine days, because remember, the human being evolved at a time when food was not plentiful, and therefore we're designed to store a little bit of fat to help us through those lean times when food isn't around. And we can also, as I say, produce glucose out of this process to be used as energy for our fight and flight mechanisms. So we are geared up to be able to flee from the enemy. And even if we haven't eaten for days, our body is able to retrieve energy, if you like, from our stored energy. What's happening in modern times is we're getting far too much food all the time, and we are storing more and more of this as body fat, but more importantly around our organs as well. And this is causing us huge, huge problems. So the 3 kinds of fats that I was referring back to, that the basic denominations for the 3 kinds of fats are monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated. And saturated fat is the one that's been demonized the most because that occurs in animal products, but it actually occurs in all natural sources of fats, because in fact it is nigh on impossible to find any form of naturally occurring fat that has just one of those 3 elements in. They've all got all 3. It's just the sort of division of the proportions or percentages, if you like, of the different ones that vary from different fat to fat. And actually the fat that contains the most saturated fat is coconut oil. So that's a vegetable, a plant-based oil, but it's actually got more saturated fat in it than an animal source of fat. Olive oil has more monounsaturated fat than the other 2, but it does contain all 3, as do all healthy fats. So the idea that it's just saturated fat we should stop eating is a nonsense, because you can't, unless you simply don't eat any fat at all. And if you don't eat any fat at all, you are going to suffer because fat contains fat-soluble vitamins and other micronutrients that are essential to life. So, as I know, I've got quite a few of you out there who are vegetarians and can't get your fat from animal sources. The omega-3 fatty acids, which are part of the components of fats that are really important. We've got omega-3s and omega-6s that are the most important. You will hear of omega-9 as well, but we focus most on omega-3. And we need to get a ratio of omega-3 to 6 at least equal, but preferably slightly more omega-3 than we eat omega-6 in our diet. So for vegetarians, they have to look very hard at what they're eating and make sure that they are getting a reasonable component. And on the slide here, you'll see a lot of the seeds and nuts are good sources of omega-3s. But if you're not careful and you overdo the omega-6s, where you get those in cashews and almonds, and chickpeas, which are very popular in a vegetarian diet, but if you overdo those to the expense of the ones on the previous slide, then you're going to be more liable for inflammation, because the omega-3 is very much a calming effect on the body. Omega-6 is necessary and we need some of it, but if we have too much of that to the detriment of omega-3, it can be very inflammatory. And the sunflower oil there, which is heralded as having plenty of omega-6, is something we'd like you not to be eating anyway, because sunflower oil will be highly processed. And I'll come back to why we don't like those oils in a moment. Oh, not the right one. Yes, the slides have taken on a life of their own. So the reason we don't like those seed oils, which are often referred to as vegetable oils, and I do not know where this idea came from that vegetables have oils in them, because most vegetables don't have oils in them, but the seeds they use to produce this oil have to be highly processed in order to extract the oil out of them. So they use chemicals and heat treatment and all sorts of things to get these oils. These are very toxic, particularly when they're used for cooking. So we really would prefer you to completely abandon these seed oils and go for cold pressed, naturally occurring oils. So obviously if you do eat dairy, butter and ghee are one of the best sources. And then obviously for your plant-based side of things, coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil, these are really good oils, which are usually cold pressed rather than rapeseed oil is fine if it's cold pressed. Has slightly more omega-6 in it, so it's good to use a mixture of these oils and not just use one, particularly if it's one of the cheaper ones all the time, because you might get into trouble with your omega-3, 6 balance. But these vegetable oils, we cannot stress enough how toxic they are, and yet this is what we were being encouraged to eat for so long, along with margarine. And if you actually found out the process whereby they use these margarines, manufacture these margarines rather, you would be horrified. They're the most man-made gloopy gunk that you could ever imagine. And why we were ever convinced to put those in our bodies, I do not know. Thankfully, because there's been a bit more information out there, margarine sales are gradually falling off, but you do still see people buying them. And these seed oils, I was just reading something tonight that said that if you strain these seed oils after you've used them for cooking, they'll work very well in the engine of your car. Now, if something is appropriate for the engine of your car, I would suggest it's not appropriate for your body. But in fact, a lot of the processes for making these seed oils came from the knowledge that they had for making engine oil. And I think that tells you a lot. The other big myth that occurred around the time of this sort of demonizing of oils was that cholesterol is really bad for us. Because, and I'll show you a little image in a minute to explain a little bit about why they think cholesterol is bad when it comes to cardiovascular disease. But actually, it's really important to know that cholesterol is a naturally occurring product that our bodies make and that we need. It's important for just about every cell in the body, especially our brains. It's also needed to make hormones like vitamin D, which are essential for our immune systems and our bones and teeth and all the rest of it. And we're learning more about vitamin D deficiency through this COVID epidemic. Our liver will make cholesterol and adjust the amount we need. So there's absolutely no evidence at all now that dietary cholesterol that you take in through food, affects what you have circulating. And in actual fact, there are more and more studies coming out now that show that people with very low cholesterol levels have a higher all-cause mortality rate than people with high cholesterol levels. So there's absolutely no truth in this idea that high cholesterol is a sort of life-threatening problem. If somebody has familial hypercholesterolemia, where they naturally in their family always seem to have higher than normal cholesterol, that needs to be carefully monitored and looked at. But it's the ratio and the types of cholesterol that are high that are important rather than a total cholesterol. And often we're not given enough information to understand whether we've got actually a good high cholesterol or a bad high cholesterol. And the other thing that's most important to look at, which often is overlooked, is what you could triglycerides, which is one of the readings in the whole cholesterol panel. And triglycerides are high when you're eating too much carbohydrate, because as I mentioned last week, if you overdo the carbs so that you've got taking in more energy via carbohydrates than you need, those carbohydrates get converted by your liver to fat, triglycerides. The quickest way to get triglyceride levels down is by going on a low carb diet, because then your body needs to release those triglycerides from your liver as energy, and gradually they'll get removed. And non-fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic, fatty liver disease is one of the most important causes of liver damage in the UK at the moment, indeed in the USA as well. And this could all be controlled by diet. And yet people are given the news and basically told you've wrecked your liver, and they aren't advised about what they can do about it. And it's too many refined carbs that are doing that, including fructose, not fat. So please do not worry. Eggs have been given a clean bill of health. So if you do eat eggs, do not worry, you can have as many eggs as you like. That is not going to affect your cholesterol level. And one of the reasons why cholesterol seemed to sort of be earmarked for being the baddie is that when people have these blockages in their arteries and they look at what's forming those blockages, they will find cholesterol in there. The reason that the cholesterol is there is because that coronary artery or whatever blood vessel it is has become inflamed due to poor diet. And when the body's inflamed, it has various different mechanisms that come in to try and repair the damage. And one of the elements of damage repair is cholesterol. So you will find cholesterol in a plaque like this that's blocking an artery, but the cholesterol didn't start the problem. The cholesterol is trying to help the problem. But that was misunderstood and has been misused. The manufacturers of statins are making a very large sum of money, and they don't want people to realize that actually it's not the cholesterol that's doing the damage. So it's really important that we understand it all starts with trying to reduce inflammation in the body. Inflammation is caused by too much insulin, too much blood sugar, and that's driving the whole thing. And the high-fat Mediterranean diet, which consists of lots of extra virgin olive oil, nuts and oily fish, etc., has actually been found to help to put out the fire, if you like, in this graphic, because we are causing the inflammation by the kind of rubbish that we're eating, but if we actually eat that healthy diet, it helps to reduce that inflammation and stop us getting these blood clots. The other really good thing about fat in our diet is it improves the flavour and satisfying nature of food. So it really helps us to stay full without the carbs. So if you cook your vegetables with a healthy dollop of butter, ghee or olive oil or whatever, it will be much more satisfying than something that you've just boiled or stewed. And it will taste an awful lot better too. And we also need, as I mentioned before, those fat-soluble vitamins cannot be properly absorbed if we're not eating the fat that contains them, and also the fats that help with their absorption and so forth from the gut. So the oils that we would recommend that you use for cooking would be, ghee is probably the best, because butter is fine if you're not cooking at too high a temperature, but obviously it's got milk solids in it which will burn. Controlled burning of milk solids makes a very tasty sort of nutty butter that you can pour over vegetables. But if you want to do really high temperature frying, then ghee will be better because it's obviously lost the milk solids. Avocado oil has got a very high smoke point, so it is better than olive oil. Olive oil is fine for sautéing, low temperature frying and cooking. And indeed, in many Mediterranean countries, they do use olive oil for just about all of their cooking. But we kind of prefer probably that you go for an oil with a higher smoke point, such as avocado, if you're doing really high temperature cooking, or coconut oil. There's red palm oil up there in the top right hand corner. Now that is cold pressed and very, very good quality palm oil. You will find a lot of palm oils and canola oils and various other cheap oils that are highly refined, and we really do not want you going anywhere near those. So you can't go wrong with butter and ghee, coconut, avocado or olive oil, as long as the olive oil is cold pressed. You do look at the bottles, because the cheaper olive oils, if you check the label, it'll tell you that it's often a combination of refined oils, and if they mention the word refined, it's probably industrial, and therefore you don't want to be having that product. So that's really all I wanted to say at that point. So this is an opportunity for you to just, anything that I've said that maybe doesn't make sense or you want to ask a bit more about, pop into the chat box now. I'll stop sharing my screen in a minute, but just to show you the last few slides that I've got, which were some suggestions. Just again, some of you have been doing really well with tweaking your food and your favorite dishes. And just to give you a few more ideas that I have taken from dietdoctor.com, which I really can highly recommend as a great website for lots of information and also lots of great ideas for food. And so breakfast ideas, if you're vegan and you don't eat eggs, obviously, then you can make your own version of scramble with this sort of idea, with tofu and a bit of turmeric and nutritional yeast. I don't know how many of you have come across nutritional yeast. It's not like the yeast you make bread with. It's the form I get is like flakes, and it's almost like a seasoning, like stock, but a bit of that chucked into things gives a nice cheesy sort of flavour, and very, very highly nutritious, particularly for the B vitamins. But really great flavour can be added to things that are quite bland with nutritional yeast. So it's pretty not that expensive to buy. So this is made with tofu and a bit of seasoning and almond milk and some chopped chives, and it looks pretty tasty. And I've put the link on there. We'll make sure that you can access these slides afterwards. So the link to that recipe is there. If you do eat eggs, then there's an idea of a really nice scramble for breakfast with a bit of spring onion and peppers and tomatoes added to the scramble. And they use Monterey Jack cheese, which I actually have seen in some British supermarkets, but you can substitute Gouda, which gives a nice sort of flavour to that. But any cheese really would do the trick. And again, I've given you the link to that recipe. A couple of lunch ideas using halloumi and keto fried cheese with peppers, and you know, there's all sorts of things you can do. Spinach is great because it's quick to use. I did some my take on eggs Benedict the other day with a little mug cake that I made with using almond meal and flaxseed meal, and mixed it up with an egg in the microwave for a minute, a little bit of baking powder as well in the microwave for a minute, then sliced it into 4, 2 for me, 2 for my husband. Loved lots of wilted spinach on top, and then a couple of poached eggs and some of my homemade hollandaise, which is basically the mayonnaise I make in a minute with my hand blender, and a bit of extra Dijon mustard and vinegar in there, and you know, it's literally about 10 minutes from start to finish. We had really nice low carb eggs Benedict. So there's all sorts of different ideas, and you will find some keto ideas on Diet Doctor as well for other meals, and dinner ideas here using again, halloumis are very useful cheese for cooking, and they call this one the vegan Buddha bowl. That's actually tofu on the top one rather than halloumi, nicely seasoned, and some cauli rice and mushrooms and broccoli and so forth. And the bottom one is using 2 of the big portobello mushrooms as the burger, with a tempeh burger in the middle there. So there's all sorts of ways you can tweak your food to be low carb and still feel like you're eating a really substantial meal, but you're not getting all those dangerous carbs. And that was all I wanted to share with you for now. So hopefully we've left plenty of time for questions. So if Davina and Dacha want to unmute themselves and help to see what they've spotted on the chat box while I've been talking.
I think Daksha's already answered some of the questions about like good breakfast.
I can't hear you very well.
Sorry, I'm saying Daksha's already answered some questions.
Oh, is she? Right. Good for her.
Give your breakfast ideas.
Yeah, I was being asked about, specifically I was asked about what I would have had for breakfast or what I would have, and so I mentioned like I eat eggs and then I mix it up with different veg. So some days I'll have it with green beans and kale, sometimes mushrooms and tomatoes, but eggs tend to be the base of mine. But on the days that I don't want eggs, then I'll make the homemade granola. I personally have it with tinned coconut milk because I can't tolerate dairy, but for anyone who does, they can have yogurt like you suggested last time. Chia seeds are a really great idea. I think you mentioned that last time as well. And you can put some seeds on it, or you can put some of that granola on, or you can put some chopped up flaked almonds, you know. So there are many choices, but I also, one of the answers I gave was that breakfast doesn't have to be breakfast foods. It is just a meal. And so I did mention that, you know, we are brainwashed by the food industry to think we've got to have breakfast foods like cereal, toast, and anything else that's marketed as having first thing in the morning.
Yeah, quite agree. I mean, you'll see if you go on to Diet Doctor, what you can do in Diet Doctor is put your details in and what your likes and dislikes are, and they'll give you a suggested meal plan for a week. And they'll very often suggest last night's evening meal as leftovers. for either your breakfast or your lunch the next day, because there is no rule that says it has to be eggs or cereal in the morning, absolutely none. And in many cultures, you know, they don't, thankfully, haven't got onto these awful carby cereals and things. So it really is your choice entirely. What you have, but the Greek yogurt and granola, I've got a recipe for granola, and I know Dacia has one. Perhaps we can post those onto the WhatsApp group. I make a batch of granola every few weeks. I try not to eat too much of it because I like it so much I'd eat too much, but it is quite filling. My husband loves it, and I've got my elderly parents having that with Greek yogurt and a few berries in the morning. Much better than the awful cereals they used to be eating, and they're fine. It keeps them going till lunchtime. So yeah, lots of ideas for breakfast.
Once you stop eating the cereals, you don't actually miss it.
Say that again.
I'm saying once you stop eating the cereals,
yeah,
you don't actually miss it.
Yeah.
Bharti's asking about the hypothyroidism and high cholesterol. She said she's been eating a good diet for many years. And she's had, like, you know, she eats low carb and uses the right oils, no fried foods. She's pretty fit and healthy, but she's got high cholesterol and hypothyroidism. So she's just wondering if it's hereditary and, you know.
I would suspect the cholesterol is if you know, my mum has, and, you know, it doesn't matter what I do. She's eating a very healthy diet now, but her cholesterol just doesn't budge. But she's fit and healthy as an 88-year-old, nearly 89 can be. And I think her cholesterol hasn't shifted since she was first checked, which was probably 30 years ago. And that's just the way some families are. I think it is important, though, that you don't miss out on fats, because you miss out on important nutritional elements of your diet. It would be interesting if your doctor does a proper profile for you to see which elements of the cholesterol are high, because it's the triglycerides that are the most important, along with the LDL. But there's two types of LDL, and we often don't discriminate, and we just get a sort of broad results. And actually, it's the Thatcher, help me out. The LDL.
Yeah, because there's two types of LDL as well. Yeah, there's the small
LDL,
dense, and the fluffy one.
That they don't normally sort of, as I say, extrapolate out in the standard British tests. So there's a lot more to cholesterol than kind of just one reading. So I think if you're eating healthily and your general lifestyle is healthy, I would try not to worry about it too much.
Cholesterol's always been high, and my triglycerides were high as well. After doing low carb, my triglycerides dropped from 2.7 to 0.8, which is, you know, a massive drop. And I've never had good cholesterol, like the HDL. It's never been that high. After the, you know, changing my diet a bit, you know, the good ones actually gone up for the first time in 55 years. So it does work.
Yeah, I'd like to mirror what you're saying, Davina. When I changed, my triglycerides were high, and they kept saying, oh, you need to bring your triglycerides down. And they kept saying to me, you need to cut out fat foods and all the rest of it. I did that. My triglycerides did not move. Cut my carbohydrates right down, and my triglycerides came down beautifully. So, you know, we're not just talking about a one-off situation.
No.
We've all experienced it.
No, and I mean, unfortunately, an awful lot of doctors don't understand that. They're just taught about fat, and they don't understand that it's actually carbohydrates that have been converted to triglycerides. I have a cousin who'd had a heart attack, and he'd been put on, when I spoke to him, he was on 2 statins. And he kept saying they're really worried they can't get my triglycerides down. And I asked him what he ate, and I stopped counting at lunchtime. By lunchtime, he'd had the equivalent of 30 teaspoons of sugar, because it was all cereal, toast, sandwiches for lunch, you name it. And I said, you'll never get your triglycerides down till you stop eating all those carbs. And he wasn't eating any fat at all. He was cutting all the fat off everything, not having butter. He was having those dreadful margarines on his bread. You know, he was just doing everything opposite to the way we now understand you should eat. And I just thought, you know, and these were consultants as well as his GP who were telling him to eat this way. And, you know, it was head in hands time for me, because I thought, what can I do? He's on 2 drugs he doesn't need to be on if they just get his diet right. Because the other thing was they were on and on to him about losing weight, and he wasn't able to lose weight, which wasn't surprising given what he was eating. So unfortunately, we have to take on some of these things ourselves. Somebody's asking there about oil. I hope I answered that. Avocado oil can go up to about 260 degrees centigrade. Coconut oil, I think, can go pretty high. So they are probably the best for high heats.
I think you can use ghee as well, isn't it?
Well, yes, ghee. I mean, because ghee without the milk solids will tolerate high temperatures. And what a lot of chefs do, if they want to fry something and they want to use olive oil, is they'll put some butter in with it. And the two together work quite well. Obviously not if you're going to mega high temperatures. But as I say, the jury's out. We have got this sort of general idea that olive oil and so forth shouldn't be used at very high temperatures. But when I speak to people who've been brought up in the Mediterranean, where they make their own olive oil, they use it for everything. And they don't appear to have you know, problems with that. I think if it's good quality oil, and you know, I suppose it depends on how much fried food you're eating. If you're having stuff that's deep fried day in, day out, I'd question whether it's the deep frying or something else about your diet that's causing the problems. But you know, there are plenty of other oils now. So, and if you're buying extra virgin olive oil, I would also argue that it's a waste to use it for cooking, because it's far too nice. It's much better being used in dressings and mayonnaise and things, rather than being, you know, heated to within an inch of its life.
I think people are afraid of putting the oil on the salads and things, because
and you know, you must, because you'll get hungry if you leave out the carbs and you're not adding the fat. You will get hungry, because you need that fat to satisfy your appetite, but also it just improves the flavor so much. To me, a salad is not a salad without either a good dollop of homemade mayonnaise or a really nice French dressing that I've made with good quality olive oil and good vinegars, etc. So you know, you really do need the healthy fats to make your food enjoyable and satisfying.
And can I also add, it's the fats that help take the fat soluble vitamins into your body. So you know, you're going to miss out on all the, you know, fat soluble vitamins if you're eating a salad that's just got no fat in it, or there's no fat in that meal. So you're going to, you know, do more harm.
You should try to aim for fat and protein at every meal. You do not need the carbs at any of your meals, but you need fat and protein, preferably in all 3 of them. If you eat 3 meals a day, we will talk a little bit about intermittent fasting and so forth in the next few weeks. But if you're eating 3 meals a day, try and make sure that each one has a small element of protein and fat, because that's what's going to help maintain your body and keep you full, because it takes a lot longer for those to be processed. And therefore they satisfy you for much longer, as well as nourish you much better.
There's a question about being vegetarian and diabetic. How much cheese and milk is allowed as part of and yogurt?
Well,
here as well, and somebody's asking about what temper is.
Right, somebody else will have to answer the temper question better than me, because I've kind of seen it, but I've never used it myself. Is it on the tofu side of things?
Yeah, I think it is actually.
Is it like a matured tofu or a marinated tofu? Or I've got a vague idea. I've looked into it once. But the dairy, if you're diabetic, we would strongly recommend, I know the GPs don't give out the monitoring kits anymore, but I highly recommend you keep an eye on your blood sugars if you are a type 2 diabetic. But if you're not eating the carbs, then you won't be doing yourself any harm eating enough dairy to satisfy yourself. You need to watch milk, because it's got, you know, it's 4% carbs. So if you're having loads and loads of milk, you will be, you know, your amount of carbs will be edging up. But cheese and so forth, the amount in the quantities that most people can eat, won't be excessive, especially if you've dropped all those other carbs. instead, you'll still be eating a lot less carbs than you were before. So don't be frightened of them. I think this idea that diabetics were put on a low-fat diet, and that was the association between diabetes and heart disease. And what they were failing to understand was the reason why diabetics developed heart disease was because their blood sugars and insulin levels weren't being adequately controlled. So that was leading to the inflammation in the cardiovascular system. It was nothing to do with fat that they were eating. So it's exactly the same as everybody else, where I was talking about the misunderstanding of what's causing heart disease. It's inflammation, and that derives from bad diet, not from too much fat. So I hope that makes sense.
I'm just asking about dairy and animal products, and they cause inflammation in the body, cause autoimmune diseases.
Right. Some people are lactose intolerant, and some people don't tolerate dairy very well. And if that's you as an individual, and no doubt she doesn't, then that's an individual thing. But dairy per se is very healthy. It's got a lot of good nutrients in it. We would always advocate buying the best quality you can. So anything that's the animal welfare is the issue, and getting grass-fed cows, getting your milk from organic sources where you can, or at least knowing that they're grass-fed. Same for any of the dairy produce, free-range eggs. But there's absolutely not a shred of evidence that animal sources of foods are harmful to the body. The human race evolved eating a mixture. We are omnivores. And if people choose to eat vegetarian for religious or ethical reasons, that's their choice. But don't ever go vegetarian because you believe it's healthier, because you have to work quite hard at making sure you get the whole balance of your nutrition right if you're vegetarian. And there is no evidence at all. Most of the studies that have been done on meat, they are very poor quality studies, and they don't factor in all the other aspects of lifestyle, and they don't factor in the junk food that's consumed. They just say, oh, that person eats red meat. That person's red meat consumption could be totally really cheap burgers, or the very cheap, horrendous looking poultry that you see in America that's, highly processed. Or it could be that all their meat consumption is processed meat, such as sausages and salami, and things that have gone through a factory once they left the animal. That they don't bear any resemblance to the original animal protein that started the process. So none of the studies, there are no good studies of diet that properly factor in all the other elements of a person's lifestyle when they're demonizing meat. Or indeed dairy. So a good balance is what we should all be aiming for, of plants, but again, mostly the plants that grow above the ground, because they will be much lower in carbohydrates. Fruit should be kept to a minimum. Go for the berries and the things that have got very high fiber content and aren't too sweet. If you do eat animals, go for the best produced that you can find. So free range or organic, but they tend to be expensive. So it'd be better if we all ate less meat and ate good quality meat, and encouraged and supported farmers who are trying to go back to sustainable farming. But there is no evidence that eating meat is harmful if it's good quality meat.
Rashmi is asking about the slides, if you can have copies of the slides.
Yeah, we'll have to work a way out, Panna, of getting the slides to people. We kind of, if I put a link on WhatsApp, it doesn't work. I don't think it probably doesn't, the file is too big. So
they're asking about what they can say to their doctors if they're changing their diet. So
right, well, what we can do is get the Dr. Joe's letter template onto WhatsApp, because that's a single document, so we can post that on WhatsApp. So I don't know if you've got it handy, Davina. If you haven't, I'll find it and put it into the WhatsApp group, and then you can show it to your doctors.
Yeah, I'll send it later on.
And actually what we can do on the WhatsApp is repost. I think I'm not sure if I've put it on this because I'm running 3 groups at the moment, so I'm confused as to who I've told what, but there are a couple of GP practices now that have got really good websites for their patients that they're happy for anybody to share, where there's a lot of really good information. So we'll put those links into the WhatsApp group as well. And that's, again, something that's good to show your GPs and practice nurses, because it shows they've come from other practices who are doing this work and having great results. One's called Freshwell, and can you remember the other one, Datcha? It's North. It popped up in something I was.
Oh, I can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll find it.
Yeah.
But they're two really good practices with GPs now that are just really loving the fact that they're seeing fantastic results with their patients. So they're very happy to share the tools that they've designed with people and other GPs. So we can sort you out with all of those.
So I've just put on the WhatsApp group the open letter.
Oh, thanks.
No problem.
That's the link.
It's done then, isn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Davina's done it too. She's done it on here.
Right, yeah, that link will take you through to Dr. Joe's website and the letter, and then you can either print it off or just save it onto your phone and show it to your doctors. But we'll put those other links on the WhatsApp for you as well.
And Jana said, I've done some screenshots if you want me to share. Then I will.
Okay, well, if you can do that. I mean, I don't know, Panna, if you've got any. I mean, the only thing with all the slides is whether I email them to you, but it's.
Amanda said something interesting. She said, my doctors are very anti-low carb, sadly.
Are they like the ones in that computer, that cartoon I showed at the beginning?
Yeah. In the end, it's your body, so you've got to do what's right for you, isn't it, really?
Even though you had such fantastic results, Amanda.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. But, you know, that we laugh at the cartoons, because I think I showed the one last week, didn't I, that showed this person who'd had all these fantastic results, and the GP still turned around and said, but it's really bad for your health. You know, you think, I've shown you the graph of what happened when people follow what the guidelines are, and the obesity and the diabetes just soars, and you just think that's so obvious. Why can they not see it?
That's actually shocking, because Amanda said the same thing as myself and Dr. yourself in terms of the results.
Yeah,
in the positive way, but then to then say about the he said one of the nurses literally said that I'm affecting my long-term health.
Have you shown her Dr. David Unwin's work, Amanda?
Do we unmute her?
Because he's been following his patients now for about 10 years.
Can I speak or not?
Yes, you certainly can.
Really? Hi.
Hi, nice to see you.
I have, for the last 2.5 years, I've been doing this. I have tried consecutively. I've printed off Dr. David Unwin's infographics. Taken I've taken in the obesity code and put them forward to Seema Hotra. I've the head. I see the head dietitian at the Nottingham Queen's Medical Centre. She's so anti-low carb, you wouldn't believe.
Really?
Yeah, she's very against.
That's tragic.
I know. And
has she got a lot of links in with the diabetes.org, do you think? Because they are a bit anti. They get a lot of money from one of the drug companies that makes the diabetic drugs.
And I even sent her one of the graphs that the PHC have about how all the different studies that show comparisons, and she just said there's absolutely no proof that low carb is good for you, is healthy, and is any better than low fat, where all the evidence lies. Seriously. So I just keep plugging it on, and I think this is the key thing. This is what's great about groups like this, where people can talk to each other and learn, and also then go off and learn themselves as well, and better their knowledge about how the body works and what we do to the body, because you have to be really informed, you know.
Yeah, the sad thing is, I mean, I don't know what the excuse for the nutritionists is, but the average doctor, and it's still, you know, it's gradually changing, but it's still not anywhere near where it needs to be. The average doctor and nurse gets no education on nutrition. You literally spend maybe, I mean, I know it's going back a long time when I trained, but I know from talking to, I think it's even worse now, to be quite honest, talking to younger nurses and doctors, they maybe have a couple of hours where they learn about vitamins and what a carbohydrate is and what a fat is, but it's not connected. They don't get any insight into how important it is for the body to function correctly. And they are just spoon-fed all this stuff that comes mainly from pharmaceutical companies, unfortunately, about managing blood sugars and things through drugs, not that you can manage it through diet.
As an example, my father-in-law reversed his diabetes a year and a half ago. So he said to the nurse, should you be reducing my medication? And she said, well, no, it's the medications that's keeping your blood sugar low. You know, he'd lost loads of weight, and he's actually changed his diet, and he's doing exercise, and his sugar levels dropped from 60 something to I think 39.
That's excellent.
So
Fantastic.
the same medications, and she just won't take him off. It's just ridiculous. So.
Will he not come off?
He won't. That's the doctor says he won't.
Yeah, I know. This is the problem that I have with my mother. I mean, I've got both my parents on low carb and their blood pressures have come right down. And I keep saying, you really need to talk to the GP, because I think your medications need to be altered. And they just won't take, you know, they won't
be old school, aren't they?
Be proactive. And of course they can't see the GPs at the moment unless they're dying. So they're just staying on all these medications, and I'm worried now that they'll go not hypoglycemic, because neither am diabetic, thankfully, but you know, get hypotension. But my father had really bad edema of both his legs just before lockdown, and they were piling on more and more medication, and I got so fed up that I said, right, I'm going to completely change your diet. So I did, which means I have to do an awful lot of shopping and cooking for them now, but within a couple of weeks my father's legs had gone back to normal, and they'd been trying for months with drugs to do something about it. And they've been fine ever since. And he stopped the diuretics and things that he was on, which he knew the doctor had only given him for the fluid on his legs. So he was happy to stop those. The GP still doesn't know he's stopped them because he hasn't seen them since, but he's so much better, and he's having to keep adjusting his belt because he's lost all the belly fat that he'd put on for the previous few years. So it really does work. And it just is so frustrating when they don't listen. And you see, David Unwin had a patient like you, Amanda, but he sat and listened and went, oh, wow, what can we do about this? And that just turned his practice around. But sadly, they're not all like that. So any more burning questions, ladies?
It's about getting the slides, copies of the slides.
Yeah, we'll find a way.
What level is good to cut down on tablets if we are trying the diet?
I think it depends what you're on. If you're just on metformin and you're monitoring your blood sugars, and if they are staying very stable in the normal range, then you can try coming off them. If you're on anything other than metformin, then you need to be consulting your GP and saying, right, I've been monitoring my blood sugars. They're much better since I changed my diet. You can even ask them if they'll do a HbA1c for you. And, you know, if you're consistently having good blood sugars, then they should be willing to let you start reducing your doses. But I wouldn't encourage anybody to do anything themselves other than with metformin. If you're on insulin, it's extra important that you consult and that you're monitoring your sugars, and that you're changing with consultation with your diabetic nurse, at least, if not the GP. As I say, we can't take responsibility for that. We're here to tell you all this, and that's what public health collaboration is all about. It's trying to help get this information out to people because they're not getting it from the right sources. But we can't take personal responsibility for mentoring individuals.
The PHC website's also got the page where they're showing all the successes with all the GPs.
Yes.
So that's a good point of reference.
Yes, it's good. It's a good case study booklet now that they've produced with the various different ambassadors working with groups of people.
Nuclear surgery. Oh no.
There's a question about herbs and fenugreek, such as fenugreek and cinnamon, about that help reduce diabetes. So Bhavna just wants to know what your views are on that.
Well, what do you think, Dacha? I mean,
my views are that herbs like fenugreek and cinnamon aren't going to do you any harm. But literally, if you want to reduce your diabetes, it's the carbs that you need to drop, increase your healthy fats. Yeah. And the fenugreek and the cinnamon may benefit, but if you were to just keep your diet as it is and then just eat more fenugreek and cinnamon, then I doubt you would see any benefit.
I totally agree with that. Herbs, I mean, I know I've got a cookbook called Indian Superfoods, and it's got some fantastic recipes in it with, and it kind of emphasizes all the different qualities of the different herbs and spices, but they're more like anti-inflammatory or good for the gut, as opposed to would control diabetes. So I totally agree with what you've said. Some of them have great properties that, in addition to a very healthy diet, will improve how you feel, but they aren't, it's the basics, those macronutrients that make the difference as far as diabetic control is. Cut the carbs, increase the healthy fats, decent amount of protein. It is important, and we'll talk about protein next week. Protein is really important for maintaining the body, and as we get older we need a little bit more protein because we naturally start to lose muscle mass and so forth as we get older. So we need to make sure we're keeping our protein at sensible levels, but we shouldn't overdo protein. But if you're in the absence of carbs, it's fine to eat as much fat as you need to keep yourself satisfied. It's really, really important that, you know, you don't get hungry and get tempted to eat the rubbish, and you can't go wrong with healthy fats. And most normal people cannot overdo fat.
Unless you're frying foods in the fat, which makes it very moreish, and then you can't control how much you eat. So be aware of that happening, you know.
Yeah, we don't encourage lots of deep frying. We're encouraging you to use the fat to produce nice sort of coatings for vegetables. You know, so I saute an awful lot of green vegetables now in a bit of butter or olive oil or whatever at low temperatures. Or, as I say, that brown butter that I mentioned, where you do put proper butter into a pan and let it get quite hot just for a few seconds, so that the lactose goes sort of, it almost caramelizes. That it's called brown butter or beurre noisette by the chefs. That is incredibly tasty, and just a little drizzle of that just brings to life something like creamed cauliflower or cabbage. So using fat like that is what we're talking about, as opposed to deep fried whatever day in, day out. You know, I do love some fried halloumi, I have to say, but I wouldn't have it every day because I can eat quite a lot of that, and that would not be good. So it's having lots of variety and using the fat to, as I say, improve the flavour, and also it will improve the satiety. Can I ever say
satiety?
That? Satiety. Thank you. The satisfactory nature of the food, so that you're not hungry. And get those all important nutrients in as well.
Artie is saying, what if one cannot eat too much fat?
Is that because of personal likes? If you've had your gallbladder removed, you can gradually wean yourself back onto fats, because you're still producing bile even if you've got no gallbladder. You just haven't got the reservoir there. So after you've lost it, you need to sort of gently wean yourself back onto fattier foods. But most people can tolerate fats. Again, the healthy fats mixed in with lots of other stuff. We're not talking about just sitting and chomping through a half a pound of butter or whatever. So mixed with plenty of, you won't get fatty liver. You won't get a fatty liver from eating fat.
Everyone's afraid of fat. That's the problem. You should be afraid of the good fats.
Yeah.
You won't get fat. You'll actually feel less hungry, and you'll actually improve your triglycerides.
Yeah, and Amanda's just added it's the carbs that give you the fatty liver.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, it is.
The gallbladder, although it sits under the liver and the bile is produced by the liver, the gallbladder is like a little reservoir, so you get a squirt of it when you've had a fatty meal. But your body will adapt and you'll still be producing the bile, but the bile is there to help you digest fats, but and it comes from the liver, but they're two separate things, and the fatty liver is not caused by fat.
Avoid all low fat foods. Do not eat low fat foods.
Yes, low fat foods will always have all sorts of nasties added to them to make them tasty. There'll be, you know, not only forms of sugar, but other additives to thicken, you know, low fat yogurts are the classic where there's things to thicken them, and it's just, you know, like a chemistry lesson. So avoid low fat foods like the plague. And I've just, before we go, I just wanted to mention that I acquired this week, I don't know if you can see it, if you can see my picture, the Carbs and Cals people have produced this one on World Food. So it's got a number of different cuisines in it, and it's got pictures in it of different foods. So I find South Asian meals there. So it gives you different pictures of sort of quantities and a breakdown. And what really amuses me is this book is sponsored by Diabetes UK, who are the NHS ones that are a bit anti-low carb. And they've been very nasty to David Unwin about his graphics. And look what they've done in this book, which is
they use the teaspoons.
Well, they've taken the idea, but they've made them like little drops of sugar.
Yeah.
So exactly the same idea, but it's just very slightly different representation. But anyway, that aside, it gives you a really good insight into the carbs and the calories and the amount of fat in each of these meals. And if you're trying to work out a balance to your meals, it's quite helpful. So this one, unfortunately, isn't available in an app. You have to get the book. I got this book through Amazon, which I think was the cheapest way of getting it. But so, you know, any good bookshop will get it for you. For those of you that are particularly new to this and still trying to work out what's good and what's bad, it is quite a useful book. It's the, say, companion to the Carbs and Cals, which is the original book that came out.
I have it too. It's really good. Everyone should get it, to be honest, or maybe the World Foods.
Yeah, I've got the app. They do an app for this basic one, which is great if I'm out and about, because I can just search for a food on my phone and see what's what. But they are particularly good if you ignore all the stuff about calories at the beginning of them, because they do go on and on about the typical calories in, calories out stuff, which we want you to ignore. But it's really good because it's all, again, in picture form, so you can see what a sort of helping looks like.
Can you hold the book slightly higher? Yeah. Can you hold the books? Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll take photographs of them both and put them on the WhatsApp group. All right. But you can get an app for your phone. I think it's maybe about $3.99 or something. But it's worth it if you like to use apps on your phone. But unfortunately not for the World Foods one. That's just the book. But I just thought I've only just got hold of this World Foods one this week, and it's quite useful.
Okay, I have one question, Caroline.
Yeah.
From Premlata. She's saying, I suffer with cardiac issues, have 2 stents since 2015, diabetes type 2 and gout, and take regular meds. I'm also a heavy scorer. Is there anything to elevate this, please?
A heavy snorer, did you say?
Scorer.
Scorer.
What's that?
I have no idea. That's what she's written, scorer.
How does that mean spelt?
Maybe unmute her so that she can speak.
I can't see her.
How are you spelling that, scorer?
I can't see her. But she messaged me on my mobile. S for sugar, C-O-R-E-R.
I don't understand what that means.
Snorer. She's saying snorer.
Scorer.
I would have thought heavy snorer.
Oh,
No,
yes,
Nora.
Nora, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people who are overweight do suffer because it affects your epiglottis and so forth at night. So losing weight will help that. But basically everything we've been saying will help with the conditions you've got. The problem is you're probably being given an awful lot of nonsense about fat being bad for you. And I can only ask you to trust us that healthy fats are not bad for you. The last thing you should be eating are any of these processed margarines and sunflower oil and things, and use the naturally occurring oils in your cooking, and cut down on the carbs, because unfortunately it's probably the carbs that have helped to contribute to the problems you've had, and they're not going to get better if you keep eating them. I know, Dacia, if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, just the fats are very important, like you said. They just balance everything in your body much better. The worst thing about carbs is the blood sugar spikes that continuously make you want to eat food, and then you have to rely on your willpower, and willpower is something you just don't want to rely on. I used to eat 6-7 times a day because I'd be constantly hungry, and now I have 2 meals a day. And I'm not saying anyone should suddenly go to 2 meals a day. I didn't go to just suddenly 2 meals a day. It was a slow progress, but that's where I'm at 6 years later. You've got to be kind and compassionate to your body.
Yes, you've just got to start respecting your body and thinking about it like a really sophisticated machine that needs the right input in order to be able to do its job well. For far too long, we've been conned into thinking we can fill it full of all this rubbish. You will only get carbohydrates and fat together in man-made foods. It's a highly addictive combination, a highly dangerous combination for our bodies, but very addictive. It causes those spikes, as Dacia says, and makes you hungry. Yeah. If you eat good, real food that's mostly protein and fat, your leafy vegetables, then you will adjust. And I think the other thing I mentioned last week about being mindful about what you're eating and why you're eating. So if you sort of go to the kitchen thinking I'm a bit peckish, have a little chat to yourself. Are you really hungry? I mean, any of you who've got kids must have gone through this, because we've all done it with them. Mom, I'm hungry. Are you really hungry? They've seen the packet of biscuits in the cupboard. They just fancy one. They're bored. Have a drink. Often a nice cup of tea, whether it's herbal tea or green tea or whatever it is, will satisfy that. Often you are thirsty, actually. Sometimes we mistake hunger for thirst. So have a drink, go and find something to do, and then hopefully you'll find an hour or more has gone by and you weren't actually needing that snack that you were looking for. In the early days, if you do need to snack, then things like nuts, not salted peanuts, but plain almonds or hazelnuts or Brazil nuts, a very small number of those will often satisfy you. A square of dark chocolate, as long as it's 80% cocoa, that often stops the sort of desire for eating more. There are a few things. Hard-boiled eggs I used to keep in my fridge when I was learning to sort myself out, because they were a handy snack that were very filling. So there are things you can have just to stop you from diving for the carbohydrates. But once you get your meals right, and do eat enough at your meals, enough of the right things. Because I think, again, some people think that when you're on a diet and you're trying to lose weight, your plate must be half empty. You can have a nice, decent plate full of healthy food. And then hopefully you'll go through to the next mealtime without needing those snacks that you've got used to. An awful lot of snacking is habit. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I have a cup of tea, I have a biscuit with it. You're not actually hungry, you just always do it. So it's about relearning those habits as well.
We've got a question about drinking water, fizzy water or soda water with food. Does it weaken your digestion?
I wouldn't say so. Water, I mean, some people suggest drinking a glass of water before a meal to make you feel fuller. I mean, there are some people, some schools of thought that say that if you drink while you eat, it dilutes your digestive juices.
Say drink half an hour before or something.
Yeah, I don't honestly know that there's much scientific evidence for that unless you're drinking gallons. But water is one of the best things to drink. Carbonated water, if you find it hard, in the winter time, I find it quite hard to drink a glass of cold water. So I can get through a bit more if it's carbonated, but soda water, yeah, I mean, they're not going to do you any harm. And if that's what it takes to get you drinking more sugary drinks, then I can't see anything wrong with them at all. And I don't believe there's really any hard evidence that they weaken your digestion, because water is absorbed from your stomach. It's not going to go down into your gut and dilute your digestive enzymes. And it might help you to feel a bit fuller, certainly when you're going through the early stages.
Go on.
She's saying, like, when you fast, there's you eat a lot of carby foods, things like potatoes and cassava when you fast, because you're restricted in the types of food that you can eat during fasting.
Our Indian fasting, which is completely different to what we talk about when we're fasting, because Indian fasting is just where you swap a whole load of usual foods out for really rich, stodgy food generally. And I think traditionally that was done so that the women of the family were nourished, because back in the day, many years ago, the women in the household were sort of eating at the end after everybody else had eaten, and there wouldn't be much food for them. So I think fasting, this is my personal thinking, was considered a good thing for those women, whereas now when Indians fast, they're just swapping out their usual meal, which is probably slightly healthier, to eating some luxury foods that are energy dense and carby. And I think Arthur is asking about, does anyone have any ideas what to cook while fasting? When you're fasting, the whole point of fasting is to not eat. And then, so if you're doing 2 meals, then you would eat just 2 normal low carb meals. If you're doing fasting where you're having only 1 meal in that day, you should just eat that normal meal. And I know generally you're not allowed chapatis and rice and certain things, but sometimes you've got to kind of still work with you can still eat nuts and seeds, I think, when you're fasting. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can, I think.
And I think you can have yogurt. And so I don't think, no disrespect to Carolyn, but I don't think Carolyn will understand Indian fasting.
Well, no, I mean, I understand the principle, but I don't know what the rules are of the foods that may be.
More plainy foods, not the normal meal. I don't know if you can have salads, but you're supposed to have things like potatoes or cassava, that sort of thing, which are quite high in carbs.
Yeah.
I would, try and look at what's allowed and go for the lowest carb that you can manage, because when we encourage the kind of fasting we're talking about for health reasons, people often ask, what's the difference between fasting and starving? The big difference is that when you eat when you're fasting, in a fasting regime, you eat very nutrient dense and energy dense foods from your protein and your fat. So you're not starving your body, you're just having all the food as 1 meal a day, or you're because you're well nourished anyway, your body can cope with 2 or 3 days without food, depending on how long a fast you're doing. But you're eating highly nutrient dense food either side of that fast. So I couldn't comment on what your allowed lists are, but I'd love to see one if anybody's got them.
There's some ideas in the chat. They're saying that eat cottage cheese and sweet potatoes and buckwheat.
Is that for religious reasons, or is this something that's come down through sort of folklore of what might be good to eat when you're fasting? I'd love to know where this has come from. as to what the rationale is for why you eat those foods.
Yeah, it's probably just.
As I was saying, this is what my dad explained to me, is because in the olden days, women literally in India, everybody in the family would eat, and they would sit down to eat, and there'd be very little food left. So they then, I think, culturally introduced fasting days where the women would be allowed, because it's a fast, to eat food that, you know, they still well, that wasn't eaten by other people, so there was something for them, you know, something energy dense. Yeah. And in those days, if you're not eating very much and very often, then those energy dense foods were detrimental.
Yeah. Is vegan cheese okay to take? Well, I'd want to look at what was in a vegan cheese, because unfortunately a lot of products that are made, you know, if they're manufactured, I've always got a bit of a concern about anything it's like processed meat alternatives. You know, we think, why try and call it a vegan burger? It's not a burger, and it's probably a hodgepodge of you know, chemicals and stuff. So I would want to know what's in a vegan cheese, what it's made from. And probably if there's, like I said last week, if you've got a package and it's got a very long list of ingredients, many of which you've never heard of or you can't pronounce, then I'd be inclined to steer clear of it.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is
yes.
Barbara here? Yeah. The fasting used to be like, there was a special name for it. Farar means only eat fruit and milk and dairy product, nothing else in olden days. But as time passed by, people just started to eat, you know, all different food.
Make it up.
Not on fasting means was fasting. The for farar means only fruit and milk and nuts.
So it may just be that if it's really just from folklore rather than any very important reasons, that if you're fasting now and you want, and I mean, we would support regular fasting as being quite a healthy thing to do, but it's making sure that the foods you are eating are in line with the low carb recommendations we're making, so that it'll sustain you much better through a fast than carb foods will, because you won't get that high surge after you've eaten and then followed by an enormous drop. So it'll make it easier to fast.
But people start to fry things, and, you know, potato chips and different flours, which is very high in carbohydrates.
Absolutely not good at all.
Very bad.
That awful combination of fat and carbs.
So fasting means only fasting. Eat 1 or 2 fruit, maybe milk and nuts. That's all.
Well, you could have nice Greek yogurt with some nuts and some berries, and that would fit into that, and that would be good for you.
Yep, that's true. Yeah.
Berries. Yeah. I think that's it.
Okay.
Can I just mention something? I actually fast every day. I don't have breakfast in the morning. My last meal in the evening is around 7ish. And then I have brunch, which is at about 1 o'clock. And it is very small amount. And that could be only salad with boiled eggs, half boiled eggs, or something like that. So basically, in the mornings, I am fasting. And that way, I'm feeling great.
Yeah.
I feel really light. And in the evening, before I started this low carb, I was feeling hungry. First 2 days I was feeling hungry, but now I don't even feel hungry. I thought, no, this is really great. I'm feeling more filled up. I drink more water as well.
Well done.
Excellent. Well, what you're doing is intermittent fasting, which we will talk about and encourage other people later on to look at. But that's perfect. And in fact, you know, again, if we look through history, we'll probably find that this 3 meal a day malarkey is a very modern phenomenon, because unless you were very rich back in the day, you probably could only afford to eat. I know both my parents, who grew up in rural Ireland, in poor families, had breakfast before they went to school. They never got school dinners, and they just had a very nutritious, probably, you know, meat and 2 veg type meal in the evenings. And that's what they grew up on. You know, we overeat terribly in modern society, and it's kind of retraining ourselves that we don't need all this food that we've been used to having, and also getting the balance right.
How about for diabetic?
Sorry?
If you are diabetic, can you do that intermittent?
Absolutely, absolutely. As long as you're eating the right foods. We're not talking about starving yourself.
No.
But we're talking about having nutritious food that your body takes time to utilize, and therefore it doesn't need to be being fed constantly. If you're taking the right kind of nutrients, it takes time for your body to digest them and use them. And what we're actually doing is more harm than good by constantly feeding ourselves, because our body can't cope with it all. So absolutely, type 2 diabetic, even type 1 diabetics are learning now how to fast, but we won't go there. But for type 2 diabetics, absolutely you can, but please wait for a week or two while we sort of talk you through everything. And depending on what medications you're on, we'll need you to, you know, be keeping a close eye on your blood sugars. But absolutely, it can be done.
Okay, I think at that point we're gonna stop that. And also, I wanted to ask you for next week. I want you to talk about, like, I'm genetically built cholesterol, very high cholesterol. How do we outcome for that? So we'd like to discuss more on that next week if it's possible.
Okay, well, I mean, I mentioned a bit about that today, and we're going to talk a bit about protein next week, but we can come back to that. And, you know, I'll bear that in mind.
Okay.
Okay.
Also, can we mention best sources of calcium for if you're going vegan or trying out non-dairy to reduce inflammation?
Bauna, we're gonna have a talk we could on that, so we can pick it up on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll certainly be mentioning the micronutrients as well, probably not next week, but the week after. So we can certainly pick that up.
Week after, yeah.
It is very important if you're missing out food groups that you get replacements.
Okay. I appreciate everyone to join us, and I hope you've all learned something new today. And I look forward to seeing you next Friday, which is on the 12th at the same time, same logging in, same password, and have a lovely weekend. Stay safe. Stay indoors.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, Daksha, and Davina. Really appreciate for you to spare the time for us again as voluntary. And everyone, keep safe. Thank you all.
Panna. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday, Panna. We just saw your banner.
No, it's not mine. Sorry, we had a surprise party for another colleague of mine.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay.
Thank
you. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.